Imagine being 5 years old. The ocean has swallowed your town. Prehistoric fish drift past your house like something from another age. Your mother just drove into a storm you barely understand, and the person steering the tiny boat through the flooded streets is you. But the strange thing about that moment isn't the flood. It's that the child in the boat doesn't seem afraid. The focus is somewhere else. Keeping a promise. And I think that moment quietly reveals what Ponyo is really about. Not magic, not even the ocean, something else entirely. But to see it clearly, we actually have to start with the adults. Because the adults in this film feel something first. Long before the ocean rises, something already feels off. Fujimoto lives beneath the sea, surrounded by floating bottles, potions, and carefully controlled systems. It almost looks like a laboratory drifting through the water. At first glance, he feels like a villain, but the longer you sit with him, the less villainous he seems. If anything, he feels anxious. And honestly, that anxiety feels understandable. Fujimoto has watched humans for a very long time. He's seen pollution spread across oceans. He's watched ecosystems weaken. He's witnessed the slow damage humans cause when convenience outweighs care. So his instinct becomes control. Contain the system, limit the variables, prevent the next catastrophe before it happens. Psychologists sometimes call this catastrophic anticipation. When someone experiences enough instability, they begin expecting disaster as the default outcome. You stop assuming the world will hold together. You assume it will break. And once that mindset settles in, control starts to feel necessary. I could be wrong about this interpretation, but Fujimoto feels like someone who stopped trusting humanity's direction a long time ago. Someone who decided the only way forward was containment. But something strange happens in Ponyo. The tighter Fujimoto tries to control the system, the more unstable everything becomes. Ponyo escapes, the potions spill, the ocean begins rising, ancient fish reappear. There's a moment where prehistoric creatures glide past houses like the planet has suddenly remembered an earlier version of itself. Control doesn't calm the system, it destabilizes it further. Systems theorists actually talk about something similar. In complex environments, overcorrection can make systems more fragile. Trying to regulate every variable sometimes creates the instability you're trying to prevent. The ocean in Ponyo almost behaves like a living system responding to pressure. And the response doesn't feel violent. It feels ancient. The boundaries between sea and land begin dissolving. Gravity softens. Time almost feels like it's folding. Ursula Le Guin once said that fantasy doesn't escape reality. It reveals it. Sometimes strange imagery makes emotional truths easier to see. And the emotional truth here feels like this. The systems adults depend on are starting to fail. But the most interesting thing about Ponyo is who doesn't panic. Sosuke. When Ponyo reveals her fish form, the moment passes without hesitation. No suspicion or interrogation. Food appears, a name follows, and before anyone has time to question whether this situation is safe, a promise arrives. Protection, care, stay with me. Nothing about that response feels strategic. There's no calculation about ecological consequences. No pause to determine whether the world might collapse because of this decision. Someone is in front of him. Someone who needs care. And the response feels immediate. That sincerity becomes the emotional center of the film. Miyazaki seems to understand something about childhood that adults sometimes forget. Children often relate first, and adults categorize first. Developmental psychologists like Jean Piaget wrote about this while studying how children interpret unfamiliar situations. Before rigid categories form, children respond relationally. The first question isn't, "What is this?" It's closer to how do I treat this? And Sosuke never seems interested in classifying Ponyo. He just stays beside her. When the ocean rises and the world transforms into something prehistoric, Sosuke adapts faster than anyone. Those ancient fish pass the window like living fossils. Roads become rivers, the sky changes colors, and somehow none of this seems to interrupt the journey. The focus stays simple. Stay with Ponyo, keep the promise, and move forward. Which reminds me of something anthropologist Margaret Mead once suggested. She believed the earliest sign of civilization wasn't weapons or tools, but it was the evidence that someone cared for another person long enough for a broken bone to heal. Care before control. Sosuke operates entirely in that space. And there's also this other way to interpret what's happening in Ponyo. And I'm not completely sure Miyazaki intended this, but it's difficult not to see it. A lot of the adults in this story feel like people carrying what psychologists now call ecological grief. The quiet anxiety people feel when they realize the natural world is changing faster than they can stop. You see it in Fujimoto. You even see it in Lisa. The sense that something fragile is slipping out of balance. When people feel that kind of fear, they usually respond in two ways: control or despair. Fujimoto chooses control, but Sosuke represents something else entirely. Care. Not fixing the world, not dominating it, just relating to it. And maybe that's why the story places the balance of the ocean in the hands of a child. Because children still relate to the world before they try to manage it. There's also this Japanese idea that keeps coming to mind while watching this film: Mana no Aware. It roughly translates to the quiet awareness that everything changes, not resisting change or freezing the world in place, but recognizing that all things move. Adults often resist that movement, but children move with it. I'm not certain Miyazaki consciously built the story around this idea, but the emotional tone of Ponyo feels very close to it. And another Japanese concept feels relevant here too: kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the crack, the repair becomes part of the beauty. The object doesn't return to what it was, it just becomes something new. That's what happens in Ponyo. The world doesn't return to perfect order. It settles into a new equilibrium. Fujimoto releases control. The ocean calms. Change becomes part of the system instead of something suppressed. And the first time I watched Ponyo, I didn't think about any of this. It just felt charming. Bright colors, weird fish, a toy boat turning into a real one. But watching it again years later feels different. Maybe Miyazaki's films quietly grow with you. You see them once as a child and again as an adult. And suddenly the adults in the story make way more sense than they used to. Remember that moment from the beginning? A child steering a tiny boat through a flooded town, the ocean covering streets that once felt permanent, prehistoric fish drifting through neighborhoods like time slipped backwards. At first it looks like chaos, like something has gone terribly wrong, but by the end of the film, the moment feels different. The world didn't end, it changed. And the person guiding that change forward isn't the scientist trying to control the ocean, it's the child keeping a promise. There's something quietly hopeful about that. Not hopeful in a naive way, but more like a quiet suggestion that the future doesn't always belong to the people trying hardest to stabilize it. Sometimes it belongs to the ones who can move through change without panicking, the ones who relate before they try to control, the ones who keep promises even when the world feels unfamiliar. Maybe that's the quiet hope Miyazaki leaves us with. Not that the world will stop changing, but that the people who inherit it might learn to live inside that change more gently than we did. And maybe that's what Ponyo was asking all along. When the tide rises, will we try to force the ocean back? Or will we learn how to steer the boat?